Hi, Alexia. Welcome to the Your Dose podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. For the listeners, whereabouts in the world are you based?
I'm in Utah. So I grew up in Virginia. I grew up just outside of DC.
Mm.
Um, and my husband grew up in Spokane, Washington. And so opposite sides of the country. And then we both went to college in Idaho and we met there and then ended up in Utah. So
Wow, what a love story. And what's the weather like there at the moment?
it's so nice right now. We've got
Yeah.
like a week and a half of spring. So it's like 60 degrees and it's so nice. And before we know it, it's going to be like 100 degrees. But
Oh,
this
really?
little window of spring is so nice.
Oh, lovely. Well, thank you for sharing that with the listeners. Um, would you like to share with the listeners a bit about who you are, I guess? Obviously, you have an Instagram page and you share your mental health journey. Um, So yeah, what is it that you share on there and what would you really like to talk about today?
Yeah, so I share about my mental health while being a mom. I started the account to talk about my miscarriage. I had a
Mm,
miscarriage in 2020. And when I went through that, it felt like nobody was really talking about it. And I didn't know where to find people who were really talking about it. But
mm,
I felt like I really needed an outlet for it. So I created the Instagram page to just be able to talk about it, even if it was just into the void and nobody ever saw it, to just get those thoughts out there and I was just writing a lot. And it grew. People, it was something that was needed. And so more and more people started following it and engaging with me. And I met so many really cool friends on there.
wow.
I took a break from my Instagram page for about a year and a half, um, just for my mental health to spend less time on social media.
Mm,
Um, and then I came back and, my phase of life has kind of changed. I'm done having babies.
mm.
And I got diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. And so now I'm kind of bringing awareness to that because that's another thing that I just don't see people having real conversations about.
Yeah, that's amazing. Such a journey. Um, I guess it might be good to start with the miscarriage because that's really where the page began. Would you be comfortable sharing that journey a little bit more?
Yeah. So it was my third baby, and he was a little boy.
Mhm.
And I found out I was pregnant June of 2020. It's kind of a chaotic time, and we weren't really like counting on this happening. And so it was such a big surprise. I was trying to wrap my brain around having a third baby in
Yeah.
3 years. Um, and I finally kind of come around to it and we're getting excited. And then I go to an appointment. I was 18 weeks along and he said, "I'm sorry, there is no heartbeat." And I was just like really in denial. I was like, "What?" Like, no, that
Mm,
doesn't happen. Like, that's not going to happen to
wow.
me. Um, but he told me I had a couple different options. When you're in the second trimester, he told me that I could go get a D&E, which is where they surgically remove the baby, or I could go on the labor and delivery floor and I could have him. And I both of those options sounded terrible to me.
Mm,
And so my husband and I, we had a weekend to decide. We had 4 days in between where we were just deciding what to do. I ended up deciding to go on the labor and delivery floor and deliver him. And that was really, really hard because, there's women next door having live births. And so you're hearing babies cry and
wow.
you're hearing
Oh,
celebrations and people are so
wow.
excited. And that's really, really hard. And yeah, so I was in labor for about 7 hours. And then he came, he weighed like less than half a pound. He was tiny, tiny, tiny because he had stopped growing a few weeks before. And we got to hold him and spend a few hours with him. And we named him Wesley.
Oh,
Um,
so
and yeah, he
nice.
was just cute and just tiny, and he had bony little elbows, and his little ears were starting to form, and just really cute.
Oh,
And so yeah, and then passed him off. Someone came
wow.
from the mortuary, and we said, "Okay, here's our baby," and handed him off, and went home to our other kids.
Wow. I actually can't even begin to comprehend how difficult that must be as a mum. At the end of the day, that's your baby. Like,
Yeah.
how did it feel to give him away?
It felt so wrong. Like, there were so many
Yeah.
parts of the process that it just felt so unnatural, like and after he was born, I got up to go to the bathroom, and I just set him down on the bed, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, like, you're not supposed to just leave your baby on the bed," even though, obviously, he's not gonna go anywhere, but it felt so wrong, just
Yeah.
so and leaving him with a stranger, when he's 12 hours old, it just felt so weird, and, like,
Well,
already being a mom, I feel like I knew exactly what I was missing out on by
I
not having
mean,
him.
yeah, you've grown this person that's a part of you, and it's like I've never had a baby, so I'll never know. And um, but it's yours, and it's that motherly instinct, isn't it, to look after
Mhm.
and take care, and then to like give that away. I can't even imagine what emotions that must have brought up for you. But
Yeah.
what happened when you went home?
So we went home. My sister-in-law and my brother-in-law were watching our kids. And
Yeah,
so we went home, we picked up the kids, we came back with them, and it was just, it was just like back to normal life so quickly because we have these other kids, and my kids are like, "Oh, can I have lunch? Can I have chicken nuggets?" And so I'm
no
just making
way.
chicken nuggets, and it was just this like such a weird thing that I was like, I just went through this horribly traumatic thing. I was just holding, my dead baby in my hands, and then I come home and I've got to microwave chicken nuggets for my other kids and like referee for them. And so it was like I felt so lucky that I got to go home to other kids. It's this moment where I'm like, wow, like I'm so lucky I'm not just coming home to a quiet home after going through something like this. But at the same time, this is so hard to like take any time for myself to feel anything.
Such a crazy thing to navigate because I mean, it's loss, it's grief, and people often say when somebody passes away, it's such a hard thing to comprehend that the world just goes back to normal. And that's a really good example of like things carry on, but you're stuck in this grief space and like your whole world's falling apart. And often you hear about it when people say, well, everyone just gets on with their own life. Like everyone still goes to work, all my friends are still living their normal life, but this huge thing has happened to me and I just have to kind of get on with it. And I think that's definitely one of the most difficult things by the sounds of it.
Yeah, that was really, really hard. And just seeing that like time was still passing and everybody else's lives were just carrying on, which like what else are they gonna do? But it,
Yeah.
it just like it's like my whole world just
Just
stopped.
fell apart.
And
Yeah.
everyone else just carries on. And, I had friends who were pregnant at the same time as me. And I had
Oh
a friend
no.
who was due just a few weeks after me. And that was really, really hard, honestly. At some points, it was hard for me to see like her social media posts and everything like that. And
Yeah.
she had had miscarriages before. So she was like super sensitive to, what I was going through and was really considerate about it.
Mm.
But it was still just, it was hard watching her reach these milestones that I was like, oh, like I'd be there. And now I'm not.
Yeah. It's a weird, it's kind of so contradicting, isn't it? Because she's your friend and you want to be happy for her.
Mhm.
But at the same time, there's probably an element of jealousy even and being
Yeah.
annoyed at her. And that's so normal, right? Because
Mhm.
that was what you were supposed to have. Um, How did you navigate that situation?
Honestly, so this is something that I talked a lot about while I was navigating it on social media. And I talked about how normal those feelings of jealousy are. And I
Yeah.
think just accepting the fact that I was jealous and not kind of villainizing it as some like negative or ugly emotion and just accepting like, hey,
Mm,
I'm jealous. I want what she has. Like, oh, I'm irritated when I see even someone's random and I see their cute little bump and I'm like, oh, that's so annoying. And so I think just accepting that really made such a huge
mm.
difference. I didn't try to fight it. And, I would just vent to my husband or like a close friend and just have that safe space to vent about it and then kind of move forward from it.
And what do you think were some of the sort of the best support systems and coping strategies that you had to get through this? Obviously, I know that your Instagram page sounds like it was a big support system at the time.
Yeah, Instagram was huge for me. Talking to people who understood where I was coming from was so helpful, and feeling like I had a safe space to say those kind of uglier things.
Mm,
To say I'm really jealous or I'm really mad or or,
Yeah.
I'm not feeling grateful right now, or, just to say those things that I think people are uncomfortable saying sometimes. Being able to say that to someone who just turns around and says, I get it. I get it. I
Yeah,
felt the
that's
same thing.
amazing.
It's so helpful.
Yeah, the non-judgmental side of it, because you probably felt so like a bad person for maybe feeling like that, but it was they are natural emotions. You can't control the way that you are feeling. And like how long do you think I'm sure you still suffer now, but how long do you think it took you to kind of, I guess, accept or, come to terms with what had happened?
Yeah, I feel like after the first year, I feel like things drastically improved inside my head. I feel like I was
Mm,
able to better accept where I was at, and that like my baby wasn't here. And I feel like within 2 years, I really felt like I had done a whole lot of healing. And I've seen people say, like it's not time that heals all wounds, it's what you do with that time. And I think
mm,
that's so true because it's like I've been in really regular therapy. I've been talking about it a ton. I've like worked through a lot of triggers. Like there's times, where a pregnancy announcement will like sting a little bit, or I'll see that somebody, has a little boy in March and it's like that's when I was doing. It's a little bit of like, oh, that's hard, but I it does not hurt nearly as badly as it did. And I think it's because I've confronted a lot of those triggers with like the work I do on social media. I'm just constantly talking about these really hard things and having these hard conversations. And it's been so worth it to do that.
um Is there a particular type of therapy that you had, or was it talking therapy?
So, talk therapy, honestly, like it was a really good starting point for me.
Mm,
I think to get comfortable with therapy, but for me, EMDR therapy
mm,
has been so helpful,
yeah.
so helpful. And I've done it for other things as well, besides just miscarriage. I did it for like a car accident that I had. Um, and yeah, that has really changed things for me. I feel like I can like I talk about what's going on with me a lot, and I'm like, okay, I can talk myself in circles about like what's going on with me, but I need to like do something. And I feel like EMDR was that for me.
Would you mind explaining in your term what EMDR is? Because there might be a person who's listening to this podcast who's never listened to any of my podcasts before. We spoke about EMDR a few times on the podcast, but I'd love to know what it is to you and kind of what the experience is.
Yeah, so I think kind of the best way to describe it is you're reprocessing a traumatic event in a way
Mm,
that is more productive and helpful for you now. So like when I did it for my car accident, we created, my core belief that we were trying to eliminate through EMDR was that I was incapable of protecting myself.
mm,
And that I didn't know what to do if worst case scenario happened. By the end of it, I had the opposite belief. I had the belief that I am capable of figuring things out and I can keep me safe and I can keep my kids safe.
wow.
And so what we like physically did during the therapy is we used the light. I know some use like tapping and some use little vibrating things, but I would just you watch a light on a bar move back and forth while you're talking about these things. And it's kind of hard, diving back into these hard experiences and talking about them, which is why I think starting with talk therapy is often like a good place to start because you kind of build that trust with the therapist and
Mm.
you recognize that it's a safe space and then you can move into the EMDR. But yeah.
Yeah, it's something to do with the thank you for explaining that. That was really good. I think it's something to do with the bilateral, isn't it? So you can't be
Mhm.
thinking two things at once. So if you've got two parts of your brain activated, whether it's like, so I've done the tapping before, which is like a and then obviously the looking either way, but using both parts of your brain at the same time, so you can't be thinking two things at once. Is that's kind of
Yeah.
the concept, isn't it? So you can't be thinking I am a bad person whilst also thinking I am a good person. So you whilst you're programming your brain to think I am a good person, I am good enough. You can't be doing this and thinking that you're a bad person. So it's really interesting. And I've heard so many success stories for so many different things, especially PTSD. So, yeah, that's incredible. And I guess outside of therapy, is there anything that you were doing or still do at the time to help? manage what's happened?
Yeah, I think that honestly, I think that talking about it was a huge thing for me, talking about it with just safe people outside of therapy.
Mm,
Also medication. Because I think a lot of people don't realize you can have postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety after a miscarriage. Like, no matter how early it is or how late it is, you can deal with those things. And so I definitely like dealt with that. And so I started medication after, and that was a huge, huge, huge help to me and still is.
that's incredible. Moving on a little bit to, you mentioned BPD diagnosis in your 30s. Is that right?
Yeah,
So
at 29, yeah.
which is so I'm 28 now. So yeah, it's crazy to think about now being diagnosed with something, but I always think I should probably go and get a new diagnosis because yeah. Anyway, but it seems like such a long road to go to your doctors and explain everything and then, go through the whole process. Yeah, I mean, were there any signs there in when you look back into your younger life and teenage years?
Yeah, definitely. There definitely were, and I think that I thought a lot of them were anxiety, and I think that some of them are, and I think, they all kind of play together, all all of the symptoms,
Yeah,
and it's
absolutely.
hard to know what's what, but I think I had just always thought that I had a lot of anxiety,
Mm.
um, and I would have these episodes where I would feel like I was out of body as a kid, and just kind of, watching myself and like kind of floating outside my body and watching myself do whatever I was doing. And I mean,
Wow.
as a kid, I thought I had magical powers. And so
Really?
I didn't tell anybody because I was just scared and it just seemed like such a weird thing. And but yeah, I thought I had like powers to come out of my body. But then I realized, that's a trauma response. So yeah, there was that. And I always had a really hard time like being alone at all. A really hard time being alone with my thoughts. Like I used to make my little sister like come into the bathroom with me, like when I'd go to the bathroom because I didn't want to be alone for like 2 minutes.
Wow.
Um, and yeah, and so I was in a relationship like all of high school, and then graduated, and then we broke up for a little bit, and then I got in a relationship with my husband, and so I've always been like attached to
To a
someone
person.
else, which can kind of help the symptoms and it can also make it harder.
Mm. Because I've had a person on my podcast before, a female, talk about BPD, and one of the things that she mentioned was her inability to form and hold relationships. So it's interesting to hear that you've had these stable relationships in your life and still have BPD, um, which I think is important because that's a misconception, is that people with BPD cannot be in a relationship. You hear that a
Mhm.
lot. So has it affected your relationship in any ways, and how might have it affected it?
Yeah, I think that one of the biggest ways it affects it is that I have such an insecure attachment style, and I
Okay.
need so much reassurance. Like if my husband looks at me wrong, I'm like, "Do you hate me? Are you going to leave me? Like
Yeah.
what's going on here?" We've been married for almost 10 years, and sometimes it's just like it's really hard for me to trust that people like me and that people enjoy being around me and that people, that he wants to be in a relationship with me. And it's just
Mm.
really, really, really hard to trust that. And so that can kind of be taxing on him. And it's also really hard to be in my head and to be
Mm.
wondering, do they like me?
Do you think there were any other symptoms that you've had? Because this is really interesting to hear your side of and story of BPD, because you often get told some kind of like scary things about having BPD, and one of them being that typically people with BPD have a lot of suicidal ideation,
Mhm.
suicidal attempts. Is that something that you struggled with?
Yeah, so I had an attempt in September of last year, at the beginning of September, and that's my only, time I dealt with suicidal ideation a lot.
Mm,
I remember, thinking about it like a lot when I was in high school. I would have thoughts about it, and it was just kind of like little intrusive things, or I would, feel really low and feel really depressed and feel like that was what I wanted. And then after I had my last baby, it was just like constant. Like it was just like all I could think about some days. And sometimes it just felt really intrusive. And other times it was like triggered by like feeling low.
mm. And were you telling people about what you were experiencing during that
Um,
time?
no, I wasn't.
Wow.
Yeah, it's so scary to talk about that as a mom because I'm like, are they going to think I'm a bad mom? Are people going to think you shouldn't have my kids? Um,
Mm.
yeah.
How do you think it is being a mum with BPD? Does it ever affect that relationship that you have with your children?
I feel like right now, I don't really feel like it does because they're little, but I worry a lot about how it will as they get older. Because people with borderline, we often go through something called a split, which
Okay.
is like, the black and white thinking when it comes to relationships, that it's like if something goes wrong, then it's like, okay, then it's all bad in my head. And I just want to like cut that relationship off. And I had made a post about like having BPD and the fact that I'm a mother on TikTok, and somebody commented and they were like, "Are you worried that you'll split with your kids when they're adults?" And I hadn't really thought about it, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, like that's the most terrifying thought." And I have hope because I feel like I am one who I've been able to have healthy, long-term relationships, and I've been able
Mm,
to do that, and I know that I'm going to keep working on myself, and I'm going to keep trying to keep my symptoms like under control. And
yeah.
so I have hope that it's going to be okay with them.
And you mentioned with your so you had your suicidal attempt last year. Um, was that the sort of breaking point that then led you to go and receive the diagnosis of BPD?
Yeah. So after it was like a couple months after, I went to go meet with the psychologist. And we did all of the testing. It was like 4 hours of testing.
Really? Oh my
Um,
gosh.
it was miserable, honestly.
What sort of tests do they do for 4
So
hours?
yeah, so it was IQ testing. That was a really big portion of it because we did everything. And so it was IQ testing, it was personality testing. It was, I mean, I was matching all these different words with like similar words. And I was like, I don't even know what any of this really is doing, but
Relevant?
yeah, I don't know. I have no idea. It was so intense and I felt so stressed.
Mm.
Like having someone across the table who knows the answer to the question and I'm trying to figure it out and figure out this
Oh,
puzzle and they're just watching me and it's like, "Oh my gosh, at
yeah.
the end of this they're going to tell me, how smart or dumb I am," and that's really stressful for me. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so I did this testing and then again like a couple of months after that I got all the results and so they gave me four diagnoses. And so it was BPD, generalized anxiety, major depressive disorder, and PTSD, which, from my understanding, almost always comes along with the borderline diagnosis.
Did you ever think during any of this time that you might have BPD? I know that
No,
now in retrospect, obviously now looking back, you had these episodes, but was there ever time that you maybe thought researched it and thought, oh, maybe I do have that?
I never ever thought that. The first person to bring it up was a psychiatrist I started seeing after my attempt. I started seeing her, and after two meetings with her, she was like, "Okay, here are some things that I think we want to keep an eye out for." And it was
Mm.
BPD and ADHD, and obviously depression and anxiety. And so that was, those were the things that we tested for. And when I heard ADHD, I was like, well, that would make a lot of sense, with some stuff. And my husband has ADHD, my sister has ADHD. And so I'm like, I'm familiar with this. I'm like, maybe. But BPD, I was like, no, thank you. I don't want that one. Because it felt really scary because everything I've ever heard about it is extremely negative, and people
Yeah.
talk about, oh, my crazy ex was borderline and whatever. And
Yeah.
that was that felt really scary.
Yeah, the question I was actually going to ask you was how did you feel when you got the diagnosis?
It felt depressing, honestly, because it's one that I just haven't seen a lot talked about it, period. And whenever I've heard about it, it's framed very negatively. Um, it was something that I thought, oh my gosh, I don't want to tell people this because then
Mhm.
everything I do is going to be put under this lens of, oh, it's her borderline or oh, she's so borderline. Like that was my fear. Which then obviously I ended up telling everybody. But
It's really interesting because I've looked it up before and it's just framed in such a negative way. And if anybody, I mean, you probably have read things before, and it's like people with BPD cannot hold relationships. With BPD will never be able to live a normal life, and like it's just so negative. And yet, you're the second or third person that I've had in the podcast who absolutely has been able to. In fact, I had someone with BPD come on and talk about she was pregnant and she already had a child before, and she lived a completely normal life. And this is why these conversations are so important because it's the same with schizophrenia, for example. We associate schizophrenia and any form of psychosis with people murdering people and committing terrible crimes. When, I mean, The Joker's a great example of a film where somebody with psychosis was portrayed in a really bad way. And then we think that everybody who has these mental illnesses must be a bad person, or, BPD is obviously not the same with crime, but anyone with BPD must be manipulative and all of these things. And it's like, that's just so not the case. That might be like one case of it or a few cases of it, and now it's putting all of these people with that illness into a box and assuming that everyone's like that. So I guess that leads on quite nicely to my next question around if you were to combat any misconception of BPD after your experience of now living with it and being diagnosed, what would it be?
um, I think that you're toxic in relationships.
Yes,
I feel
because
like
that's the
that
big
is.
one.
Mhm. And that's something that I've seen a lot, and that's what, again, when I've talked about it on TikTok and Instagram, people have commented like, "Oh, I was told I have it, and that's why I'm so toxic in relationships." And I'm just like, I refuse to accept that means that I'm toxic. I'm not. And
Mm,
I think, people with borderline, like we feel the exact same emotions that anybody else does. It's just that a lot of the time they are heightened. Like,
exasperated, yeah.
yeah. And so it's like I'm not feeling anything that other people are not feeling. I'm just feeling it on a bigger scale a lot of the time.
Mm,
And so it's like I'm a very normal, very normal person.
yeah.
And again, it's like I really want people to feel like there's hope if they've gotten that diagnosis because, like I said, I've been married for almost 10 years. I have my three kids. Like it's possible to have healthy long-term relationships. It's not without a lot of work, but it's possible.
What have been some of the I guess treatments and strategies that you've put in place to help manage your BPD since you've been diagnosed?
So I'm on multiple medications. This is like the most medicated that I've ever been. But it's also the best and the most stable that I have felt, which is it's like a hard pill to swallow that it's like I have to be so medicated.
Mm,
But again, I think I'm kind of crawling myself out of a hole from last year. So it might not always be this way. And then I also do weekly therapy. And that's been really good. I have a really, really good therapist right now who I always say she's like the equal balance of like validating me and, being really comforting, but also like being really honest with me and like pushing me.
mm,
And
yeah.
so that's been super good is like because I've moved through, a few different therapists and some of them it's just like they were a good fit for me in one stage of life and now they're not. But like, yeah, really, really prioritizing finding a therapist who is the right
Who works
fit
for
and
you.
is exactly what I need. Yeah, has been huge.
And you talk about equal partnership in marriage on your Instagram. Um, what does this mean? And like, why is this so important to you?
Yeah, so when we had our second baby, I realized, okay, we're not in a great place as far as like splitting up our tasks and the all of the emotional labor that goes into a
Mm,
home. My husband's he's always been a really involved dad. He's changed diapers, put the kids to bed, whatever. But I needed help. I needed more involvement. And it was really, really hard for me to go to him and say, "Hey, I know you're doing so much." Because I've been a stay-at-home mom and he's gone and worked outside the home. And it was really difficult and it was uncomfortable for us to
yeah.
have those conversations and say, okay, let's look at how we're dividing things and who's in charge of what and who is like doing the conception of the plan and the execution of the plan, like who is doing all these things.
Mm,
But when we had those really really hard conversations, and I mean they were uncomfortable for both of us a lot of the time, but then coming out on the other side of that, and I mean we do still have to continue to have those conversations, but coming out pretty much on the other side of that, I feel like our relationship is so much better. And having that sense of like safety in the relationship, knowing that we can have those hard conversations, I
yeah.
think is huge for anybody. I think it's just really huge.
Yeah, and like I think it just comes down to boundaries and not being a people pleaser, because you were basically you were taking that step to do something that ultimately was going to make you happier and make your life easier. And we don't like having those conversations, especially when you're naturally a people pleaser. I interestingly had a conversation, and I'm sure she won't mind, but about to one of my best friends, and it was a difficult conversation that we had the other day. And I really didn't want to talk to her about it, but I was like, I know that if I have this conversation with her, I won't resent her. And I know we've been friends for so many years that I know that she will listen to me and hear me out and respond in exactly the way that I want her to respond. But sometimes we're just too scared to make that initial move to have that conversation. It always usually, if that person is meant for you, whether that be a friend or a partner, or a coworker, whatever it is, if they're a good person, then and they're meant to be in your life, then they'll listen and take what you have to say on board. um and you should be able to move forward, and it only makes your relationship stronger.
Yes,
Like,
it really is true. Like, it feels like a scary thing, and you feel like, "Oh my gosh, this is gonna ruin everything." But,
yeah.
like, almost always, their relationship is so much better at the end, and there's, like, this new feeling of trust, and it's great.
Yeah, and my friend was like, "Thank you so much for telling me how you feel, and bringing that up to me. I would never want you to feel like that." And I think oftentimes we forget that most people in our life that we care about and that love us don't want us to feel, and they just sometimes aren't aware of what they're doing, and we always think that people can read our minds,
Yeah.
especially guys. I mean, I'm not in a relationship in the past, but the amount of times I've been in relationships and I'd get really annoyed at things like I was dating someone and they'd always like leave things on the floor, and I'd be like, oh, why can't you just pick their clothes up off the floor? But if I never tell them, then they'll never know. And it's the same thing with you and having that equal partnership, and your partner doing more to help you out. Well, if he never knows, you never tell him, then he just assumes that it's everything's fine, right?
Mhm. Exactly, and then I'm holding something against him
Yeah.
that's like he
You're
doesn't even
resenting
know.
him and he doesn't even
Yes.
know. How many times do we all do this probably in our lives and resent people instead of just taking, courage to just have that chat, which is uncomfortable. Um in terms of your partner, how do you think he has best supported you through your mental health journey? And I guess that covers everything. It doesn't have to be just BPD, but the miscarriage. What do you think he has done the best? Because there might be somebody listening who is on the other side. Maybe they've got a partner who's um, been diagnosed with BPD, or experiencing postpartum depression, any of those things, and they don't know how to best support that person.
Yeah, I think it's really hard to be that support person. I feel like the best thing he's done is just like taking action to do tangible
Mm,
things that help me. Because it's really nice that he can be a listener, and like I said, he has ADHD, and he's dealt with his mental health, and so it's like he
yeah.
can he can understand me. and I can just be like, "Oh, I'm feeling really anxious for no good reason." And he gets that. And so that's really nice. But then he'll take action to help me. So he will be like, "Okay, I'm going to take the kids, so you can go on your mental health walk for the next hour, and you go do what you got to do, or like, how about you go do this?"
Mm.
And that is great. We also so I did ketamine therapy last year.
Oh,
Um
wow.
which was really, it's long sessions, and so that was a big ask for him to, because again, I'm the stay-at-home parent, to be like, "Okay, I'm gonna be gone for 3.5 hours in the middle of the day. So you're in charge, while you're working." So yeah.
Can you talk about that, please? Because
Mhm.
I've had someone very recently on my podcast, and this is a complete reverse. I've actually had a few psychiatrists reach out to me recently about coming on the podcast and talking about their research into ketamine and using it in the
Oh,
therapy, yeah, in the therapeutic space. But I actually had a ketamine addict on my podcast,
mhm.
and she's an incredible girl. I'm sure lots of people, if they're regular listeners, will have listened to the podcast, Lauren, and she's on her journey through recovery from ketamine addiction. And then you've got this flip side where you're using ketamine for therapy, and I believe it's is it only the US where that's where you can actually do where there's ketamine therapy centers? I think there might be a bit more now. Um, but oh my gosh, yeah, what was your experience and what led you to do that?
Yeah, so when I started seeing this psychiatrist after my attempt, my
Yeah.
sister-in-law had, done all the research when I was like, "I just can't even do this. Just find me somebody." And so my sister-in-law did all the research. She found this place. She found that they do ketamine therapy, and then they also do TMS, which is something that I haven't done yet. But so I met with a psychiatrist. I had to meet with her, a certain number of times, and I had to try a couple medications, and then I was eligible to do the ketamine therapy. And so I did 6 sessions, and it was it led me to make some decisions that really changed my life, and were really hard decisions. So
Wow.
I was working, I started just like last summer. I was working at a marketing agency. It was like dream job. I was so excited about it. I was so excited. And then, my mental health tanked. And afterwards I was like, "Okay, I got to get back to work." Like after going home from the hospital, and everybody around me was like, "What? Like, no, you can't do that. You can't go back to working, 30 hours a week." And I was really, really torn about what to do, because like my therapist and my psychiatrist were telling me like, you got to pull back. You got to have less on your plate. And that was really hard for me to do. And during a ketamine session, I'd sit there and I'd listen to music, and I would do like my coloring app on my phone, and I would just kind of let my thoughts wander and go where they would go. And I had this thought of like, I am doing all of these things, and then I'm like, being a mom as an afterthought. Like I am like, my kids are always, they're in the way of what I'm doing. Like I'm trying to
Mhm.
work, I'm trying to do this, I'm trying to create a post, and it felt like my kids were always in the way of that. And I thought, I want to flip that. I want my kids right now to be my priority, and I want everything
Mm.
else to be the afterthought to that. It's not like I'm still working some, but it's so much less. And so I ended up quitting my job at the marketing agency.
Amazing.
And that was, it was so hard. It was so hard, but it was the right decision
Of
for me
course.
to do then.
Wow, that's incredible. Is there somebody in the room with you at all times, or do you like have your own space and then they kind of like, sit outside and then come back in?
Yeah, so for my first session, there was a nurse who sat in there with me the whole time. And she just sat there on her laptop. The room is all like dimly lit. And honestly, it was so relaxing. I loved it so
Really?
much. Yeah,
Oh my
I
gosh.
loved it. And so, and you're sitting in this big recliner, you've got blankets on you. It was so nice. And the nurse was in there the first time in there the whole time. And then every time after that, I would sit in there alone, and they would just come in and check on me at intervals and see if the rate, because I did it through IV, and they would just make sure that the rate was good for me and, check on my vitals.
What did it feel like?
It feels like a really good high.
Really? So there
Yeah.
wasn't any moments where you felt like, scared or out of control or anything? You just felt,
Mhm. I just felt really zen, and I felt so good.
wow. So you've had 6 sessions,
Mhm.
and do you think that's it now? You won't have any more?
Honestly, I would love to do more. It is just so expensive.
Really?
Um, yeah,
How much
so
is it in the US?
it was, almost $3,000 for those 6 sessions.
Wow, that's a lot.
So, yeah, so it's a lot, but, I loved it so much, and I feel like as a mom, it was, like, incredible to go somewhere and just have people,
Yeah.
like, coming and checking on me, and I just gotta sit there and, like, really quiet for, like, 3
Yeah.
hours. It was nice.
3 hours, that's so cool. And you were just, like, coloring and, like, would you
Mhm.
write things down or, like
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, I brought a journal sometimes, and sometimes afterwards, I'd be like, "What did I
yes,
write
I was
down?
gonna
I don't
say
even
because
know."
'cause you're kind of out of it, right? And well, you're not
Mhm.
out of it, but you're, like, you're on a drug, so, like, you're not you probably yeah, I guess did it make sense what you were saying? Or
Like, then when the nurse would come in, I would always be, like, worried that, like, I didn't sound like what I sounded like in my head. Like, I was like, "Am I talking really slow or am I talking really fast?" Because time feels like it moves so weird.
s yeah, yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, but I mean, everything I said and, wrote down was coherent. I just sometimes was like, how did I get there?"
Do they track your mood or, like I guess how are they seeing whether or not this is beneficial over the 6 sessions?
So at the start and the end of each session, they would have me rate my anxiety and depression on a scale from 1 to 10. And that was
Right,
kind of how they
okay.
tracked it.
So,
Yeah.
what was your rating on the first session?
Honestly, I think it was like an 8 or a 9 for both, for depression and anxiety. I was like, I'm basically at the max. And I think by the end, I was at like a 4.
Wow, that's crazy. And do you think that it's like a lasting effect? Because I guess that's the only thing. Like, do you have to keep doing it regularly to maintain that? Because I think that's something that I'd heard is like ketamine therapy is great, but it's like it's not maybe not a such a long term solution because you feel good for a little bit after, but then you need to keep. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I feel like it kind of, it helped me crawl my way out of that hole.
Mm,
Um, but I don't feel like the effects are lasting. And so because I was doing it in combination, with therapy and with the meds, I feel like that's made a difference. But I feel like ketamine is something that I would love if I could do that like twice a year. That would be
mm, the dream.
incredible. Yeah, especially like in the winter.
Yeah.
Seasonal depression.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my gosh. So I guess coming to the end of the podcast, I mean, you've shared so much, and I'm so glad we got to talk about ketamine therapy because I've never spoken about that on the podcast, and I think it gives a really different light to where we think of drugs, and I think that's terrible, but they actually have some really therapeutic benefits as well. I once read a book, I think it's literally called Psychedelics, and it's written by a really famous psychiatrist, and he speaks about all the different drugs and all of their history and how they're used in therapy, and things like MDMA we just associate with being a party drug, but actually MDMA is like a really great um, couples therapy drug and a great drug for PTSD as well. That was really interesting to have that completely different narrative. But going to the end of the podcast, I wanted to ask for your advice, in particular for somebody who has recently experienced loss of a baby. If there was one piece of advice that you could give them, what would that be?
I think that I would encourage them to keep talking about it and to create something that is in memory of that baby if that feels right to them. Whether it's, having a little piece of jewelry that they wear all the time or they have a piece of art in their home or they write something about them, or, you create an Instagram account talking about it, like whatever
Mm.
it is, to have something that, not necessarily gives meaning to that, because, I don't want to say that losing a baby, there has to be any sort of meaning to that. Um, but something tangible that's in memory of them. Because a lot of the time, especially after miscarriage, you don't have anything tangible that you're left with. You're just left with empty hands. And so to have something that you can hold in memory of them, I think is really, really healing.
And what's your memory? What have you got that
So
you hold?
I consider that to be my Instagram community that I
Mm.
built. I feel like it has created a lot of meaning in my life for me, and I consider it like Wesley's legacy, that I would have never ever done it without him.
Oh.
And so, yeah,
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and speaking today. I've absolutely loved talking to you, and thank you so much for being so vulnerable and sharing so many different things. You're such an inspiration, and to have gone through all of these things and to still be a great mom and a great partner. Yeah, I find it truly inspiring, and I'm sure that so many listeners will think exactly the same. So thank you so much.
thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.